to the Navy. A warship at sea has to be ready for fast response.
Right standard rudder. The rudder is right 15 degrees, notice one given.
The need to carry enough fuel to get to a place and do what you need to do while you're there is going to continue to be a problem with any ship.
While on patrol, Bunker Hill has to keep her fuel levels high.
Typically, we only burn a few percent of fuel every day. We try and keep the ships above 70%. That's because we're trying to keep our readiness up at all times. This ship could easily transit the Pacific without receiving fuel, but we normally don't like to.
Refueling at sea is an essential but highly dangerous process. All of the vessels involved must maintain exactly the same speed and distance, or they could be quickly sucked together with devastating consequences.
The evolution is inherently dangerous, but it's never unsafe.
Emergency breakaway now.
Emergency breakaway. It's not emergency breakaway.
Come left.
Come left. There's 150.
Nonetheless, a sudden crisis, in this case engine failure in the other cruiser, demands immediate withdrawal and emergency procedures to avert a serious accident.
Are we hearing anything on bridge and break? Hamilton reports for casualty. Loss of fuel and pressure, MER2. And I recommend we just maintain this position. Doc Camden will maintain.
Fuel supply would always be a challenge for the modern ship. But in the 1840s, there was another barrier that would hinder the steamship's acceptance as a man of war.
Putting a paddle wheel on a warship was opposed by virtually all naval officers for various reasons. You could imagine how vulnerable a paddle wheel powered ship was. One shell could destroy easily a paddle wheel.
The machinery took up a tremendous amount in the middle of the ship, the most valuable place for putting artillery. And because of that, the guns of the ship could only be placed at each end, and a steamship could not be as heavily armed as a sailing vessel of the same size. It didn't pack as hard a punch.
The paddle steamer never became the capital ship of the world's navies. For the warship, there had to be a different means of propulsion.
The ideal solution was to apply the engine's power in another part of the ship, preferably below the waterline and out of harm's way. The key breakthrough is the development of the screw propeller.
The principle of the screw propeller was far from new. It had been around in one form or another since ancient times, but not as a means of propulsion. An early prototype was named Archimedes, as an acknowledgement to the great mathematician by her designer, Francis Pettit Smith.
Pettit Smith had quite clearly put a lot of thought into this, but he was no engineer. He came up with what was an Archimedean screw, the basic ancient technology for lifting water. He simply reversed it to drive the ship through water. Pettit Smith's first trials were conducted on a canal, and while he was propelling himself along the canal with his full-turn Archimedean screw, he literally hit a piece of wood, broke the propeller in half, and the ship promptly moved rather quicker. His development engineering skills were at about that level.
But two men are credited with introducing the screw propeller. Aiding Pettit Smith in his experiments on a London canal was an engineer recently arrived from Sweden, John Ericsson. And Ericsson brought with him some original ideas.
He was a mathematician by training, and he was one of the first to understand the concept of research and development, R&D as it's sometimes called. He would build a model of a steamboat, test it in the water with his own machinery.
Whereas Pettit Smith was very simple, Ericsson's was very complicated. Ericsson came up with a twin-bladed, contra-rotating propeller of the utmost complexity. Ericsson's worked when he threw away half of it at Pettit Smith's advice, and the two of them by 1836 had patented the application of the technology and then set out to persuade people to back them.
But Pettit Smith had also taken out separate patents. He found backers and was able to start production, but Ericsson, the outsider, was without friends or funds. The Admiralty, convinced of the efficiency of the screw propeller, immediately began trials with Pettit Smith's models on a converted sloop, HMS Rattler. In 1845, she was set against her half-sister, the paddler Alecto, in a series of trials that culminated in a remarkable tug of war, propeller versus paddle. Alecto was first underway and proceeded to haul Rattler astern. But once the Rattler's engines kicked in, she slowly turned the game, and the screw propeller won. It was a publicity stunt, but it had worked.
You cannot exaggerate the importance of the screw in persuading naval officers of the value of steam propulsion, because the screw propeller resulted in the machinery being put below the waterline. It meant that ships could be far more powerful as far as the batteries were concerned.
Meanwhile, without financial backers, John Ericsson had fallen on hard times.
Ericsson's brief period in the London debtors' prison ended, and he came out and met up with the American consul in Liverpool, Francis B. Ogden, who introduced him to Captain Robert Stockton of the United States Navy, a wealthy landowner who ran canals and also had ambitions to be a leading figure in the American Navy. Stockton recognized that Ericsson had something of enormous value, and he persuaded Ericsson that the grass was greener on the other side of the Atlantic. And so Ericsson comes over with his ideas, with his technology, and Stockton gets him a contract to build the first steam frigate for the United States Navy.
Through Stockton's influence, the pair had access to one of the most progressive naval leaders of the day, Secretary of the Navy Abel P. Upshur.
Upshur was, of course, the Secretary of the Navy at the time, a very, very good Secretary of the Navy in the sense that he understood the importance of steam propulsion. He understood the value of the Navy moving into building a fleet of steam-powered warships. And when Stockton came in and made the proposal to him, Upshur accepted it and was able to persuade Congress to appropriate the money for it.
This ship was USS Princeton, not just the United States' first screw-propellered warship, but the world's first to have her engines below the waterline, out of harm's way.
Princeton was a typical example of Ericsson's engineering genius. He hit all of the right targets with this ship. It was pretty much the right way to go in all areas. But he put on board it a very large experimental gun, which he'd made to his own design. Stockton, not being one to be behind in anything, had a similar gun made to his design, and the pair of them were on the ship, the Oregon and the Peacemaker.
Princeton was a cause for huge pride and an attraction to all the leading figures of the day. Abel P. Upshur himself paid a VIP visit, with tragic consequences.
They fired several of the guns at various times to entertain the public, and one last shot was fired from Stockton's gun, and a crowd assembled around it. And instead of sending a shell down the river, it exploded and killed several people, including Upshur, who was quite literally decapitated.
Once again, Ericsson's luck had deserted him. Upshur was not the best politician to have killed.